The DC offices had these kind of cavernous sort of corridors with nothing going on in them, with doors off leading into people's offices. And there was this besuited figure with glasses. Is there such a word as besuited? A smartly suited gentleman. And Joe said, "Brian, let me introduce you to Steve Ditko." And the first thing that came into my head was, "I heard you were a deformed dwarf."
Okay, how do I sell you guys on Nemesis, our first ever book from Dark Horse Comics, coming in July?
Imagine a genius playboy billionaire philanthropist, but he's a city's worst nightmare. He's so bad, all the heroes have to get together and stop him. But now he's back and he's looking for revenge. Check out this art from Valerio Giangiordano. He's one of the best guys I've ever worked with. Rogues Gallery has turned out really special. You guys are going to love it.
Well, what do you think?
It's okay.
Brian, it's good to see you. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Yeah, what can I say?
Do you remember the last time we saw each other in person?
Well, I can only think of one occasion when we saw each other in person, and that was in Paris.
Exactly.
Is that the one you're thinking of? Have we had this conversation already?
No, because it blows my mind. It kind of feels like a dream when you talk about it, when you tell people what we did. It was 1 year to the day after Princess Diana died, and we were in Paris in a car, a small car driven by Gilbert Shelton.
That's right. And Grant Morrison was there too, wasn't he?
Grant Morrison and John McCrae, all five of us squeezed into this car, doing 100 miles an hour through that tunnel where Diana died.
No, I remember that slightly differently. I remember it being 1 month after she died, and I don't think it was 100 miles an hour. It was probably 100 kilometres, possibly. I don't know.
Who can you trust more than Gilbert Shelton behind the wheel? You know, who would be safer?
And it's the only time I've ever met him, and I think it's the only time I've ever met you, isn't it?
I think it is actually. Yeah. He's like, that must be over 25 years ago. That's crazy.
Whose idea was that?
I don't even know what we were doing in town. We must have been doing a signing, but do you not find signings and travel all blurs into one thing? I can't even remember what I was doing.
We were having a meal together, and I remember the restaurant, because I used to go along that street. It's where they sell the books by this side of the river.
Right, yeah.
And I remember roughly the restaurant, and we were all eating together. And I had the idea it was Grant's idea. It's the sort of thing he would have thought, unless possibly it was your idea. I don't know.
It was definitely wasn't mine, so possibly Grant's, you know. And I think, there was a restaurant. Was it in something like Jardin de Cluny or something like that? It was like a...
Possibly, I really can't remember that. But the thing I remember about Grant Morrison was that he used to talk about Myra Hindley. And he called Myra Hindley the anti-Di.
That's right.
Do you remember that? They had a sort of similar kind of look. And later on, I was actually living about 2 miles away from Myra Hindley because she was in a jail very close to where I lived in Suffolk. I never met the woman, but there you go. That's the whole story.
One of my friends' claim to fame was, the other Moors murderer, Ian Brady.
Brady, yes.
One of my friends went to his old school, and I just thought it was the weirdest claim to fame. He was kind of weirdly proud that someone people had heard of had been to his school, but it was bloody Ian Brady. So.
Oh God!
But it's Scotland, what can you do?
Well, absolutely. Anyway, at the time when we met, I didn't know who you were. I assumed you were a friend of Grant's. You both being Scottish, I guess that was an assumption I made.
I'd been labouring in the industry, kind of like unknown, for about 7 years, I think, at that point. So I was doing those things that nobody reads. Those little backup strips. And,
I've done those.
That kind of thing. So it was at that stage, and my career didn't actually take off for another 3 years beyond that. It was 2000s before things took off. So I was actually doing okay. I was making a living sort of through the 90s, but literally just making beer money and, sort of doing the books. The books, I think they're completely forgotten now. Everybody thinks my career started in March 2000, but I literally had 10 years before that, which was nice because you learn how to practice. It's kind of like you with, when you did those African superhero comics.
Yes,
it's a great university for comics, isn't it? You're doing the stuff that people don't see as such in
right. It was
in the American market.
That was ideal. I was able to draw 300 pages that no one ever saw. So it was a very good sort of...
I've actually got them. Yeah.
You've got some, have you?
Yeah, loads of them. Yeah, I got loads.
Oh, good.
Because I assumed you were African.
Really?
Genuinely, yeah. Because I remember there was a guy on Scottish television talking about you round about 1977, 78. A guy who I'm now friends with. He runs a radio channel. He's a big music guy called Tony Curry.
Okay.
And he was talking about you and Dave Gibbons on Scottish television, when I was a kid.
A couple of well-known Africans.
Yeah.
No.
And he gave me some of those comics. I got to know him years later, and he gave me some of your books.
Yeah, well, I've got them pretty much. I don't have them at the moment because somebody's collecting them, and they're going to be published in a couple of volumes, I think. So I think my copies have gone off to Dave and a fellow called Tim Pilcher, I think his name is.
Tim's the glue that holds the sort of British scene together. He knows everyone.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. He used to work at Vertigo, actually. He worked at Vertigo for years. He was in...
Did he?
You know that English office that Vertigo used to have? He was one of those guys.
Did they have an English office somewhere?
I think the English office was Tim. I think it was his bedroom, so like...
Well, there wasn't a physical office there. I'm going to tilt this screen down a tiny bit. I think I'm sort of dropping off the bottom of the screen. I've got this a little bit better.
That's perfect. That's good.
Yeah, we've all got bookshelves behind us, haven't we? You have to have a bookshelf behind you if you do a podcast, just to give the impression that, that you're well read.
I was thinking of just putting something else behind me when I started this, like tools or something like that, where it's just drills, and just to make it slightly confusing for anyone to figure out what it's about.
Well, I've been trying to work out, I would really like a kind of spooky effect of some sort. When I used to do a podcast before, I had a spinner, that one there, and it would move mysteriously without me touching it. And people said that they thought the place was haunted. And I was thinking I'd really like to get a kind of I've got a skull, and I was thinking it'd be quite fun if I could rig up a mechanism where it sort of gradually sort of appeared from behind my back. Make these sorts of things a little bit, but I wasn't that prepared, unfortunately.
One of my friend's wives, she's a GP, a doctor, up in Glasgow, and she was doing Zoom calls during COVID with patients. And as a gag, if he knew the patient, he would lie in the background with a blanket over his head and just a pair of legs sticking out in the background. She was unaware,
There's an excellent, I've never seen the film, but there's a Japanese horror movie where, do you know the one I mean, where there's a figure talking in the foreground, in the background there is a sort of pile of blanket on a bed.
No.
And at some point during the course of this conversation, the blanket suddenly moves. And it's really, really good. It scares the shit out of you. I don't know what the film is. It looks good.
Japanese films are the only things that actually scare me. Like American films, I feel I've seen it all before, but the Japanese stuff for the last 25, 30 years, it gets under your skin, doesn't it?
Well, Ring was very good, wasn't it?
I mean, and it seems such an obvious one, but it really is frightening, isn't it? It's got really disturbing moments, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very good.
So, like, it's funny, I've been sort of vaguely chronological with things, and I'm so interested in the fact that you were born at such a specific time that you kind of missed Marvel almost in a way, didn't you? You get into DC because that was the first thing that was available to you as a kid, wasn't it? Like Marvel hadn't quite happened.
Marvel hadn't really started. Did Marvel? The current iteration of Marvel was 1963, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I got into comics in 1960.
Yeah.
But it was Dell Comics and some of the others that were on the go at the time. Turok, Son of Stone, I've forgotten who published that.
I think that's Dell,
And I had a decent-sized collection of comics before Marvel came along, so I was well entrenched with DC before Marvel.
But it's kind of like bands and everything as well, is it? Whatever you get into first, you become imprinted on that thing, don't you?
That's right.
That's you kind of the rest of your life, isn't it?
That's right, yes. Yeah, absolutely. The stuff you liked when you were 17, 18 or so is always the best.
Yeah, yeah.
And that for me was 67, 68, 69. They were the 3 great years for music. But, there are later things too.
But what's the age difference between you and Dave, like Dave Gibbons?
He's 2 years older than me. I'm 73, so I guess he's 75 currently.
So you and Dave are DC guys, whereas Alan Moore and those guys, they were born like 1953 or something, 54?
Alan's 2 years younger than me, so he's,
So he's bang on Marvel then?
I guess so, yes. But I mean, the thing is, you probably, everyone knows that comics came into this country in 1959 as ballast in ships, didn't it?
Oh, I didn't realise it was as late as that. I thought it was sporadic. Was that a thing then? It was 1950.
I think some of the comics came over with the American servicemen during the war or after the war.
Yeah.
But they didn't start coming onto the shelves until 59, when they were bunged in the holds of ships to get the level of the ship to the right height or something.
Yeah.
That's the story I've heard. But
I've heard that, yeah.
59. And so, things like Dell Comics were in the shops then.
Yeah.
And DC.
And also, weirdly, an amazing British scene as well, which Americans don't quite appreciate how big comics were here. Even things in the Dandy were doing from DC Thompson, did 1 million, 2 million copies a week. And a tiny
God, yes. I mean, we've had comics since 1914, haven't we? I mean, Rainbow was 1914. But I think Americans think they invented comic books.
I love that we sold more in a smaller country. We're 5 times smaller and sold more copies, which I love.
I guess we are, yes. I guess we are. But I mean, they were all funny comics, weren't they? I mean, there wasn't really I suppose the adventure and action comics were like the War Picture Library and stuff of that sort.
And he thinks Eagle with Dan Dare and everything as well. In the 50s you had...
The Eagle, yes, the Eagle, yeah. And I was very keen on Valiant. That was my comic at the same time as starting with DC and so on. I loved Mytek the Mighty and the Steel Claw.
Well, there was some great artists on those things, though, wasn't there?
The Steel Claw was drawn by Jesus Blasco. I can't pronounce his first name correctly, but he was a terrific artist. I loved his work.
Jesus gives him a gravitas. I like that.
It does. I once said on Facebook that I was what was the word I used? A follower of Jesus, I think I said. And this person said, "Why are you talking about comics? What's this conversation about comics?" And anyway, there you go.
Because DC Thompson, it's funny, people won't know this, but I mean, they were such a phenomenon that they basically had you from the cradle to the grave. They got you for those little baby comics when you're 3 or 4, and then they started advertising their older comics in the back of the baby comics, and then they would advertise their newspapers in the back of the older comics. So they had you to the people's friend right till the end of your life when you're doing crosswords and puzzle books and things. They have you that whole time. It was genius. So
how did you get into the comics thing? I mean, were you always keen on them, or was it something you moved into?
Well, I was super precocious. I had much older siblings. So same mum and dad, but there was 6 of us, but there was a 14-year gap between me and my next brother. So I was really into reading really young, so I learned how to read from Spider-Man, Superman, all that kind of stuff, So your setup was different because you were an only kid, so you were probably drawn to imaginary things. Is exciting if you're playing in your own.
Yes.
So for me, it was actually my brothers had hit an age where it was no longer cool. They were quite cool guys. They were in bands and all that kind of stuff, So they hit their teens and they were like, we don't want to seem uncool. So they would buy the comics ostensibly for me, read them, and then I would sort of get them in the end.
Okay. Yeah.
But by the time they were about 20, they were right out of comics, but I just always stayed with it, I never stopped. But did you have a period where you weren't reading then, or were you reading comics the whole way through from 10 on?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I collected everything. I ended up with terrific, complete runs of loads of DC comics, all the way, even Showcase. I had a complete run of Showcase, well, up to a certain point. So I was able to get... I mean, some people were saying that they were quite hard to come by. Marvels weren't distributed very well, but I seem to manage to get everything on a monthly basis. And
you were right in there at the start of the Silver Age then as well, so you're getting Gil Kane's Green Lantern, Kurt Swan's Superman and everything. You're getting it all as it's happening.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And who were you tracing? Who were the first kind of guys you would get out and start copying their art then?
Oh, Gil Kane. Yeah, I was very. Some of my early stuff, there are weird-looking legs because he drew kind of a weird-looking leg. The furthest away leg always looked weird. You could always tell. And my stuff was very. You could tell as a sort of 11, 12, 13-year-old. I was trying to draw like Gil Kane, I suppose, but also people like Murphy Anderson. That sort of smooth finish of inking that Murphy Anderson had. And it was great to meet all those guys.
So, were you actually going to cons in America when those guys were still working then? Were they still...
I first went to DC Comics at 1978, because I think Richard Burton, who was at 2000 AD, he was friends with Paul Levitz, and he got me in just as a fan to meet the people at DC.
That's amazing.
And I met Joe Orlando, and people of that sort. And then on a sort of annual basis, I would go to DC when I started doing a little bit of work for them. And I met Julie Schwartz. Julie Schwartz was delightful. I mean, he was very keen on Dave and me because I think he liked our funny accents. And I think I've said this in the past, but he took me by the arm to guide me across the road because he knew that the traffic would be coming from the other direction. And he opened up his cabinet full of his personal back, copies of the stuff he'd done as editor, and just gave me a pile of his. He gave me Brave and the Bold 28, which was the very first Justice League, which he autographed for me.
That's amazing.
And it's great
He
stuff.
almost feels like a mythological figure to me, Julie Schwartz. When I was a kid, I thought it was a girl. I had a crush, like Gil Kane. I thought
Julie
was
Schwartz.
Kane and Julie Schwartz.
Jill Kane, yes.
I was so disappointed when I saw photographs of them.
He was a very grand fellow. Did you ever meet any of these people?
No, I just missed them. I did one art job with Steve Ditko. I worked with Ditko, was the old, and Kurt Swan. I got to work with Kurt Swan once, one issue as well,
Oh, wow.
But these guys are gods to me, though, I mean, I
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember as a child, at school, one of my essays was how I'd love, just a dream, I'd like to meet Gil Kane. It would be like meeting the Beatles or meeting something like that for me, and I did. But did you meet Ditko?
No, I didn't get to meet him, unfortunately. No, but I heard a rumour years ago. Do you remember Martin Skidmore, who used to edit Fantasy Advertiser?
Oh, God, yes. I haven't heard that name for a while. Yes.
Yeah, he was my first ever editor. I sold my first thing when I was 19. And he told me then that he'd been talking to you and that you met Ditko in the DC offices. You actually bumped into him.
I did.
Is that true? Yeah.
It is true, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, because you can count on one hand the people who've met Ditko, and most of them have passed away now, so what happened?
Well, only a few days before I was in Dark They Were and Golden Eyed talking to somebody about Ditko, and whoever was behind the counter, or they didn't have counters in Dark They Were, said that he'd heard a story that Ditko was a deformed dwarf and that no one ever saw him, and he passed his artwork through a slot under the door. Which is, of course, completely fanciful, but I was with Joe Staton, my friend Joe Staton, and we were walking. The DC offices had these kind of cavernous sort of corridors with nothing going on in them, with doors off leading into people's offices. And on one of the walls there was all this month's covers, one of which was mine, actually, probably my first. And there was this, and there was this besuited figure with glasses. Is there such a word as besuited? Smartly suited gentleman. And Joe said, "Brian, let me introduce you to Steve Ditko." And the first thing that came into my head was, "I heard you were a deformed dwarf." and he said, "Story can be made up." He said something like that. And the conversation didn't lead anywhere at all. I was so embarrassed. I wish I had got off to a better start. And I think he complained about the low quality of all the covers that he was looking at on the wall. That was the extent of the conversation, unfortunately. But anyway, I met him. I wish I'd had a camera with me.
The one Ditko story I heard from a friend was that he was working in a studio with 5 or 6 comic book artists, one of whom was a pal of mine.
Yeah.
He said somebody offered him a coffee in the morning, and he said, he didn't say anything to anybody, and he just said, "Work before sustenance." You know, he sounded like Rorschach or The Question or something. You know? And then he drew for 8 hours and didn't say a word. And then as soon as he finished, he turned around and said, I'll take that cup of coffee now. And I hope that's good. I want Ditko to be like that. Yeah.
Yes. Now, I was watching, in preparation for this, I watched you talking to Rob Liefeld. I think I told you this, didn't I?
Yeah.
And both of you seem to get up at the crack of dawn and start work.
I've got some weird thing where, like, no matter what time I go to bed, I wake up bright as a button at 5:25 every day. It's like some weird inner clock, you know? And I'm not tired. I wake up and I'm ready to roll, you know, and just start going.
Right.
And it's quite nice, though, I think. You know, when you have children as well, the house is all based around the kids. I've got this, like, dad time for about 2 hours before they get up.
How old are your kids?
They range from, my youngest is 10 up to 26, you know? Yeah. So, like... So, you know, your time's not your own in the evening, you're all doing stuff and everything. But I've got 2 hours where I can read the paper, you know, and sit and listen to some music and you know, the stuff that you're not allowed to do in the evenings, basically, because there's something else going on. You know? And it's quite nice. It's like being single for 2 hours every day. You know?
Well, I think the first many years of my career, I had to work long hours well into the night. And so I developed a nocturnal lifestyle, which was awful, absolutely awful. I mean, even when I was doing 2000 AD work, possibly even the Killing Joke work, I was working till about 5:30 in the morning.
Now, I always felt you weren't under pressure for Killing Joke, because I thought they were like, okay, Brian Bolland's going to do a spectacular job on this and it will take as long as it takes. That was the impression as a reader I got. And then when it came out, you were going to be happy, you know? And I thought that they would say to you, if it takes 2 years, it takes 5 years, Brian, relax, just make sure you're happy. And was it not like that? Did they give you, was there a deadline?
No, there wasn't, not really. I mean, the original editor on that was Len Wein, but he dropped out or was moved out pretty soon. Yeah. And Denny O'Neill took over the job, but I hardly knew the man. I only spoke to him once. During the whole course of me drawing the thing, I think I had one brief conversation with him, and I don't think DC really remembered I was doing it. They knew that Alan and I were doing well. I assume at the beginning they must have known that Alan was writing something and I was drawing it, but I think they then forgot, and so that's why I had all the time in the world, because I was doing a few Judge Dredd covers for Eagle at the same time as well. So there was no sense of urgency. But then right at the very end, when it was almost complete and it needed to be coloured, there was a deadline. That's why I knew I couldn't colour it very quickly, and so it had to be coloured. And that's why John Higgins stepped in to colour it.
And I guess there was that connection with Alan and Dave and Watchmen.
Yes, that's right.
The same family, didn't it?
Yes, John had coloured Watchmen, hadn't he? Yes, yeah.
But it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because division of labour is a weird thing for an artist. Like, I would hate it if somebody came in and wrote 8 pages of my dialogue or something like that. And it must feel a bit like that when you're drawing something. No matter how good a colourist is or how good an inker is, you must feel separated in some way from the work. It must be more satisfying to do everything yourself, though. You know?
Well, I even got to a point where I found it more satisfying to actually write stuff that I drew, because that way I can draw what I want to draw. I drew a story. Well, I shouldn't tell you exactly what it is, because the person who wrote it would come out rather badly. But it was a very difficult thing to draw, because the panels didn't seem to. I'm getting very close to telling you what it was, but the action didn't seem to flow from panel to panel. There seemed to be gaps. So I've only ever done one sort of commercial style bit of writing, and that was a short Batman story. And I
love that story. It's called An Innocent Guy or something.
It's called An Innocent Guy, although the title doesn't seem to appear anywhere on it. Mm-hmm. And it was a way for me to just panel by panel draw the Batcave, the Batmobile, some of the villains, just all the things I wanted to draw, because the writer wouldn't know what I want to draw. Mm-hmm. So I did a little bit of that.
But historically, I guess, I mean, the very earliest comics, it was all just one guy sitting with a piece of paper, wasn't it? You know, I mean, that's the purest form of being a comic book guy, isn't it? To write and draw and letter it yourself. Yeah.
Well, I think the Will Eisner, was it Eisner Eiger Studio, they had a sort of a system of desks where you'd have one person, when it came to the art, that is. I mean, I don't know how the writing would be done, but when it came to the drawing, I think there was somebody who drew the background, somebody who would draw the outlines, and somebody who would fill in the blacks, and that way you could turn out many pages in a day.
Yeah.
So I think they've always had that kind of system.
I guess it's a good apprenticeship as well, isn't it? You know, I mean, if you're not ready for the foreground yet, you know, you can learn from a master when you're drawing the backgrounds, you know.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
Do you know a weird fact, actually, I heard recently? Somebody at Disney was telling me that Will Eisner's partner, the Iger in that partnership, was either Bob Iger's dad or uncle, the guy who runs Disney now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's bizarre.
I don't really know who this Iger was, actually. It just came out of my memory there that it was the Eisner-Iger studio. Did you ever meet Will Eisner?
I got to know Will quite well, actually. Yeah, I absolutely loved him. He and his wife, we did a week together in Barcelona for a convention, and we hung out every night. So we had dinner every night after the show, and you know what I loved? I mean, he told me so many great stories. You know, he told me he turned down Superman. Have you ever heard this? Like in 1937 or something?
Turned down Superman?
He said that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster came to him, and he said, by this point, you know, Eisner's a legend and everything, and he said to me, everybody thinks I'm so smart and I've made all these great moves and everything. I've never had to be part of the mainstream and everything. He said, you have to remember, Siegel and Shuster were sitting in my office, and I said, this is the most ridiculous concept I've ever heard in my life. You know? And they wanted $100 or something for it, and he was like, this is not a chance, get out of here, you know. But you have to remember, I guess, how ridiculous Superman would seem in the world of the shadow and all these kind of things. You know, the pulp heroes were so much more grounded than Alien World.
I suppose so, yes. I mean, there were always kind of strong men, weren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, the reason why superheroes wear trunks is because they all came out of the idea of wrestlers and Tarzan-like sort of strong men.
Really? So it's an artistic evolution from there, yeah?
I think so, yeah. So it's not a great step from Tarzan to, and those kind of Mr. Muscle, to a guy who could lift up a train.
Weirdly, he told me he met Edgar Rice Burroughs. Eisner told me he met Edgar Rice Burroughs, and he said that Burroughs had the most amazing story that nobody ever talks about, which is that he made so much money from Tarzan in terms of the newspaper strips, the books, the movies, the radio and everything. Back in the day before the studios really knew how lucrative a franchise was, he got all the cash. So they never got a piece of it. He got everything. And he had so much money that he built a ranch in California, which got so big it eventually became the town of Tarzana. And that's why it's called Tarzana. He owned the town.
I didn't even know there was a town by that name.
Yep, two of my friends live in Tarzana, and they didn't know this story. And it's he had.
So hang on, is it Tarzan then? Is the emphasis on the second syllable, or is that just using it?
Tarzana is the name of the town based on the.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the book. So Tarzana, the town, the people who lived there. There's no statue, as far as I know, to Edgar Rice Burroughs or anything, but he literally laid the first brick, and he bought the town. He created it. You know? That's how rich he was. And then by 1938. They're giving Siegel and Shuster $150 for Superman, you know. So like,
oh God!
Did you meet Eisner? Did you ever meet him yourself?
Yes, I did. Yes, I in fact, I got a nice note from him once. I must have drawn the spirit for some. I was looking. I put it on Facebook the other day. A nice note from him saying that he was pleased with the way I'd done whatever I'd done, and somebody said, "Oh, this is the one I got from him." So. You know, it wasn't so special, but it was very special, actually. But no, I met him at a really good convention. I think it was in Grenoble in France, and Alan Moore was there. David Mazzucchelli and Richmond Lewis were there. I became good friends with them, and Will Eisner was there, and I think Kurtzman was there too.
Wow!
And Eisner asked a few of us artists to do a drawing in his book, so I did. A drawing of Judge Dredd wearing a boxer shorts or something stupid like that, and David Mazzucchelli drew a New York tenement block. Fantastic! He's such a good artist, David Mazzucchelli.
I love it. One thing you would never expect him to draw, and yet it's so completely David Mazzucchelli, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, you know, as if he could see it in his mind with the windows and,
amazing.
You know, the kind of thing that Eisner would have drawn in his stuff. I would have thought.
There's a catcher in the rye quality to Dave Mazzucchelli, isn't there? Where everybody adores him, but he hasn't, you know, done anything since the 80s that's been in the mainstream comic press, you know. But he's influenced everybody, you know. Like you can't pick up a Batman comic without seeing Dave's DNA in there, you know.
I think that period when a few of us were all doing Batman. I mean, Frank Miller did his Batman, and then I think he wrote Batman Year One, didn't he?
Yeah, Frank did.
And David Mazzucchelli drew it beautifully, and Richmond Lewis. I think when I had my Killing Joke, that was the kind of colouring I was expecting it to have, because her colouring was quite subtle.
Yeah, it was very musical.
I'm getting into old territory here, but I mean, Asterius Polyp. Have you read Asterius Polyp?
I've got it. I actually weirdly haven't read it, but I've looked at it. It looks amazing. Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah,
it's absolutely excellent. It's the kind of medium of comics somehow used to its fullest. You know, things going on like sort of. The stalks of balloons intertwining to show the kind of relationship between the characters, and the sort of spotlights moving from one character to the other, dependent on how much attention they're getting. Those sorts of visual tricks that are excellent, I think.
I love the idea of doing something that's so unique to comics that you can't do in another medium.
Yes.
That's really clever.
Yeah, I agree.
But is he teaching art now? Somebody said to me he was teaching art somewhere. Is that?
It's funny how a lot of people who I've been great friends with are just inaccessible. Alan's now inaccessible. He's exited the world of comics, and we can't really talk to him. And I've not been in touch with David since for ages. We had a meal together after a New York convention quite a few years ago. Yeah. And I think he was showing me what he was doing, and was it Rubber Blankets he was doing? Was that what it was called?
Yes, that's him. Yeah.
But he's so intellectual. I think he realised I was just a pea brain by comparison. I think he is teaching somewhere. Yes, occasionally I think you see a video of him teaching something.
But he's another guy a bit like you as well. Like, you know, for the last 3+ decades, you've written your own stuff, and I think he went down that route, didn't he? I don't think he wanted to.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I think everything he was doing was of his own writing. Yes,
because it's funny because there was a little period in the 70s and 80s where there's some really amazing writer artists, wasn't there? You know, like it went from being quite a collaborative medium to the real superstars like Chaikin, Byrne, Simonson.
Yes.
You know, like Frank Miller, obviously as well. You know, and then those later guys, you know, like Dave McKean and Dave Mazzucchelli. They really moved away from working with other people and, you know, wanted to do their own thing, didn't they? And then that stopped again, you know, after the Image guys, you know, maybe after the 90s, it went back to being writer and artist.
Is that right?
Again, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder what.
I mean, I love Robert Crumb. I mean, he's one of my great heroes. He's never. I don't think he's drawn anything that's been written by anyone else, has he?
Well, it's funny because your stuff is so interesting to me actually, because I always think he was quite a radical guy, you know, and you very much have come from that fanzine underground world in the 60s and everything. And
what, me?
And your taste in music is quite esoteric and everything, you know. But you don't have cartooniness, you know. Your stuff has a different vibe from the guys you love, like Crumb and those underground artists of the 60s and everything. It's interesting that you took a different path from these guys you love, where we normally emulate the guys we love, don't we? You know.
Yes, I can see that. I mean, I will add Jim Woodring to that list. He's almost my favourite artist. I love his work.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, the people I like the best are nothing like what I do. But, I mean, as a kid, I like Gil Kane and Murphy Anderson. You see, so basically, I'm drawing sort of classical style of. I mean, you know, people like Alex Raymond and all those really wonderful artists from the past. Really, they're the people I really admire. I admire the skill of drawing.
Nick Cardy, I can see in your stuff as well. You can see
Nick Cardy, really.
Yeah, I always think your stuff reminds me of Nick Cardy a little bit. The rendering a little bit, you know. So
yeah, no, he was good. Nice. Aquaman, did he draw Aquaman?
Yeah, he did. So you weren't influenced by that stuff then? No, it was just there in the back.
I wouldn't. I can't say as that I would. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, for a while I tried to be Neil Adams. I tried to draw like Neil Adams briefly. But failed. But a lot of people did, actually. Around about that time, a lot of artists came along. I mean, Mike Netzer and people like that were trying to be Neil Adams. There are a few others as well.
Do you not think there is always an alpha artist, though? I think going back 3 generations. There's a sort of alpha artist every 5 years that people kind of emulate, who come in, because I remember when everybody was drawing like Neil Adams, but then I remember everybody drawing like Jim Lee and everybody drawing like Brian Hitch. Fiona Staples, when she appeared on the scene about, in a big way about 10 years ago, the next 5 years I saw all these Fiona Staples imitators, It's a kind of weird thing, isn't it? Somebody leads the pack and then and there's so many guys who draw like you. I mean, over the years I've seen so many people influenced by you.
Well, I remember, was it Cliff Robinson? Is it Robinson who was told to draw like me? I think when he.
Oh, really?
That's right. Yeah. So I understand. Draw like this guy. So for a while I thought it was like me on an off day, but now it's like me on a really good day, but much better. With ideas, But if you look at 2000 AD now, I mean, I'm a terrible one. I really shouldn't be saying this to a writer, but I don't read any of the stories. I just look at the pictures and think, oh, that's really wonderful art. But the styles are also so different. It's a magazine that allows a great range of different styles of work, isn't it?
I think that's always been its strength, though, because you and Mick McMahon both drawing Judge Dredd felt like Judge Dredd, and yet entirely different styles,
Yes, that's true. No, I mean, I was influenced by Mick, actually. I mean, I don't know whether you can see it in my work, but I loved his work so much that whenever... Because his work evolved during the time he was on Dredd and all the other things. And, I kept my eye on the shape of the helmet and so on, and the way he drew the helmet was the correct way to draw the helmet. When people who draw the helmet too much like that, I think, no, that's wrong. It's not like a motorcycle helmet. It's... is it Brendan McCarthy?
Brendan had that almost horizontal.
Brendan, his goes out like that.
Yeah.
It's all to do with the shape. And also the little eye slits changed. So I was kind of copying the way Mick was drawing the eye slits. But I think you're right.
There was no wrong way to draw it, which was nice. It's like Hamlet or something, isn't it? Everybody have their own interpretation, which I really love. Because you, Carlos Escara, Brendan, Mike McMahon are all classic Dredd, and yet all completely different.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Carlos created him, didn't he? But I personally don't think he was the best Dredd artist.
Who was your guy? Was it Mike?
Oh yes. I love Mick's work.
Yeah.
There's loads of others too, but I'm a big fan of Mick.
It's funny because he's another guy who his stuff looks so free as well. It's so it's so loose in a brilliant way. It looks like he's having a great time in the drawing board. And he's another guy who takes a while with a page. Isn't he?
He does. Yes, he's very particular. Yeah, he's gone through all kinds of ways of working. I think when he was drawing Slain, I think all the black bits were all scribbled in with line. Yeah. He'd never used a solid black. So it's a funny thing, but I've been reading a book called Comic Book Punks. Have you come across that? Carl Stock.
I think I'm on the cover. I think there's a little picture of me in a tank on the cover.
Oh, is that you on there?
Yeah, it's me in that, yeah.
Well, I'm on the cover too. And it's all a bit... there isn't a single picture in the book. And it's all about stories and the writing. And it's like people who write using words, which is what you would normally use, don't seem to quite know how to talk about art.
Yeah.
They say, oh, so-and-so drew this, but it was... The conversation is, the writing is pretty much about the stories. And there isn't really... It's difficult to have a conversation as a writer about art styles, where it doesn't seem to turn up so much in the written text.
I find the stuff I'm most interested in right now, even more than comics, is books about comic book art. Like people just having double-page spreads and oversized formats and everything,
Yes.
Like I've been buying all these Frazetta books. I've got all these things over here, and Bill Sienkiewicz's Revolution and books on Ditko and Kirby and everything. And if a 300-page oversized hardcover just showing me the art, that's what I'm most excited about, weirdly, just now.
Oh, yeah, there's some great books about artists. If you go into a bookshop, there's a section on graphic novels.
Yeah.
So there'll be Batman graphic novels, there'll be Spider-Man graphic novels. But there's never any of these lovely books like Dave Gibbons' Confabulations and David Roach's Masters of British Comic Art, books about the medium, never seem to turn up in bookshops.
Oh no, my local bookshops are filled with that. And,
oh really? Oh.
And the section is as big, if not bigger, than the comic book. The graphic novel section's actually getting smaller and smaller. So manga, I'd say,
manga's getting bigger. Yes,
it's 90% of the graphic novel section now. But even bigger on the shelves across from it in both bookstores I go to, they've actually got the comic art stuff where it's maybe, just some really high-end £100 book on Steve Ditko or something,
Crikey.
Next to some Terence Conran thing or something like that, where they have it in with all the design stuff and everything. So it's really interesting, actually. Like, I think normies are getting quite into this,
Well, I'm thinking Waterston's. I don't know any other bookshops, so there aren't any others that I know of. What bookshop is yours?
It's more the independent shops, actually. It's more nothing famous. So Waterston's, you're getting manga and Marvel and DC, but the little indie shops, they've got really great comic art books just now, because every time I pass one, I go in, and even if I've got it already, I buy it and I give it as a gift to somebody else, because I want them to register that people are interested in this stuff, and then I give it as a birthday gift to somebody, so...
I don't know who's actually buying, because I've just done some covers for some collected editions of Carol Day, which was a 1950s newspaper strip. I forgot to mention that right at the beginning of my career as a kid, I was also into the newspaper strips as well. Jeff Hawke and Carol Day and things of that sort.
I was going to ask you, actually, because obviously they were ubiquitous when we were growing up, and before us they were absolutely enormous, but newspaper strips that everybody read. And in America they had things like Dick Tracy and Orphan Annie and all that kind of thing. But
that's right. Rip Kirby and stuff like that.
Why do you think that stopped? What do you think happened that people fell out of love with newspaper strips? Even when comics were huge?
They had Bloom County and things like that, which I loved. So the newspaper strips became funnies, didn't they? I think there was only really things like that. And Doonesbury?
The Guardian had that.
Things of that sort. And then they just stopped altogether, didn't they?
I guess maybe it's the decline of newspapers, because when newspapers were selling tens of millions of copies across the US, you could afford to, to run these things. Whereas it's quite expensive to have a comic strip, isn't it? The artwork is way more expensive than a crossword puzzle.
Did you ever read Jeff Hawke?
Oh yeah. I love all that stuff. Yeah,
I love Jeff Hawke.
Yeah, you did a little bit of Jeff Hawke at one point, didn't you?
I was it 13 or 14 episodes. I think Sid was running out of time, and I think Paul Neary did some, and I did a few. He's still going. He's still going strong. He's 95 now.
Are you serious?
Or possibly even 96.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Do you keep in touch?
I think there's just been an exhibition somewhere up in Scotland. Of his artwork, and he was at it, I think.
Do you know he had a sister strip for that was exclusive to Scotland?
What was that?
It was called something. It was called like Scott McLeod or something like that. It was like a name like that, like I said.
It was Lance. It was Lance Muck something, wasn't it?
Yeah, maybe Lance McLeod or something like that.
That's right, because he was still drawing it, but the Daily Express wasn't printing it.
Right.
So I think it was going over to some Italian newspaper somewhere. This was Jeff Hawke. Yeah. And I think in order to get around the fact that they owned the rights to it, not him.
Yeah.
He did something very similar with a different Lance McLean.
I think it was Lance McLean, and it ran in a Scottish newspaper called the Daily Record. And it's crazy to think now, but in Scotland alone, the Daily Record used to do about 1.5 million a day. So they could afford to pay somebody like him to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
But it must have been quite an exciting thing to get in on that as well, because that's
oh God, yeah. I mean, the thing about meeting Gil Kane, it was also a terrific treat as a sort of 26-year-old to meet Sid Jordan, who I've been reading his stuff since I was 13, I guess. So it's always a treat to me to actually get to work with these people.
What was Gil Kane like? I never met him, but he looked as if he was, unlike anybody else in comics. He looked very well dressed and slicked back hair and a kind of dandy figure. And
he was a bit of a dandy. He was tall, and he called everybody my boy.
Right.
If you want to get to know about Gil Kane, you need to talk to Howard Chaykin. You probably have. Yeah. Because I think he was his apprentice for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah. And funny, because Chaykin, I know, had this relationship with him, but I've never actually asked him, did he still love him by the end of it? Because I know he wasn't a big fan of Alex Toth, as a person and everything, but how did he get on?
I don't think anybody was a big fan of Alex Toth as a person. I think we all thought he was a great artist, but we've heard some pretty chilling. There was one story about how he threatened to throw some editor out of the window. Whether it's true or not, but apparently he was a very difficult man to get on with. And he didn't stay doing anything for very long, did he, Alex Toth? That's why a lot of people have never heard of him, because you can't tie him in with one thing in particular the way you can with Gil Kane or Jack Kirby or somebody like that.
I never thought of that. So was he just difficult and moved on? He just kept moving on?
Yes, he moved on. He did just a few episodes of Eclipso and a few episodes of, I can't remember, Black Canary and various things, but never stuck with anything.
Yeah.
He never had something which was his signature work, apart from possibly Bravo for Adventure, which was a one-off. Did you ever see that?
I've got it literally. Hang on, give me 2 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Hey, you lucky devils, just to let you know, we've got 5 new comics out this year from Dark Horse Comics. Nemesis Rogues Gallery is out in July. Prodigy 3 is out in August. Nightclub 2 also out in August. The Magic Order's big finale, Volume 5, is out in September, and the Jupiter's Legacy finale is finally here in October. Also out from Dark Horse this year, we have the Wanted and Big Game hardcover, a huge library edition, and the Ambassadors with all your favourite artists collected into one big beautiful hardcover in November. Don't miss it.
And also Zorro, I think he drew Zorro, didn't he?
Yeah,
he's gone. Mark's gone.
I keep this nearby just to...
Show it to me again, please.
Yeah.
Point it to the camera. Oh, that's lovely. I haven't got that.
I've got 2 copies. I'll send you one. I actually bought 2 accidentally. I didn't realise. I'll send you one. It's a cracking book. It's really good. Do you know what? I bought it the same day I bought The Actress and the Bishop, your collection. Weirdly, I
really?
Yeah.
You've got that, have you?
That's bizarre. That's really strange. But it's a great book, and it's oversized as well, so it looks amazing. It's really cool. And did you ever see the creepy and eerie stuff that Toth did? That got
yes. He was dotting around all over the place, wasn't he? Yes, yeah.
And Archie Goodwin.
And I was very pleased. I was very proud that I did the Innocent Guy. My Innocent Guy story was in issue number 4 of Batman Black and White, which had a cover by Alex Toth. A really excellent cover by him.
I mean, it's so minimalist, that cover as well, but amazing, isn't it? It's absolutely.
It really is, yes.
It's a shame he was difficult, because I'd have loved to have seen a 2-year Batman run or something. It would have been.
Well, yeah.
But weirdly, to go back a little bit, the first time I actually saw your work on the stands was a Justice League cover, and it was I think it was 189 and 19. Starro the Conqueror, Yeah. And I'd never seen anything like it. I was blown away, because there was a lot of great artists, but you just seemed to be immediately on another level. And then I tracked down your 2000 AD stuff as a consequence of this later, And then I realised you're the Power Man guy as well,
Yeah, from Africa. All the way from Africa.
Yeah. This young African is going places. I like it.
That's another Julie Schwartz story, because he knew I was going over. He said, draw a Justice League cover, and he didn't give me any instructions at all. But I was particularly keen on Starro from the very first Justice League in Brave and the Bold. So I'd just seen Alien, and Alien had the sort of face huggers, and I thought, well, it seems to make sense that Starro would have little face huggers. And I just drew it and took it to Julie, and he said, okay, great, we'll write a story about it.
I wrote a Starro story when I was 28 or something, and I had the facehugger thing, but I think you were the first person. Everybody's now done the facehugger thing, but I think you were the guy who did it first after the Alien went. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like to think I had some influence on the Suicide Squad movie that had Starro the Conqueror in it.
Yeah, because that cover was amazing to see the Justice League all wearing the faces.
That's right. Yes.
Disturbing, because they'd been taken over, But I loved it, and I always wondered how that happened, because you slightly predate by a couple of years that British invasion. Where suddenly all the British guys were working in comics. But so how did Julie Schwartz just see your 2000 AD stuff, or what was the reason?
That's a very good question.
Or was it your annual visits then, when you were heading out?
Well, I did a Green Lantern cover in 1979. I did a Green Lantern cover for Jack C. Harris.
Right.
Because my friend, Joe Staten, the artist, was staying at my flat and he was drawing Green Lantern, and I'm sure I've told this. You've heard this story before. I mentioned what a big fan of Green Lantern I was, and he just rang up his editor from my London flat and said, "There's a guy here who'd really like to draw the cover on this issue." And Jack said, "Okay, fair enough." I think he probably must have seen 2000 AD, so he wouldn't have given it to just anybody. Some guy off the street wants to draw a Green Lantern cover. And so that was 79, and I think that really was pretty much at the beginning of the sort of British invasion. Yeah.
Even Alan and Dave and all that, Dave drew Green Lantern maybe about 83 or something, a little bit later. Yes. So you were in there quite early on, So
well, I mean, my first full-time job for DC was in 1982, and that was Camelot 3000.
Camelot, yeah. And you did a few covers then just leading up to that, and were they looking for
I did a few short stories as well. I remember there was a couple of little science fiction stories in Madame Xanadu and things of that sort.
Yeah. A Mystery in Space, I remember you doing a kind of 6-page Mystery in Space or something.
Yes. Yeah.
But so they just turned their gaze on the Brits a little bit after that, and do you think you kind of maybe...
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it happened. I mean, I know how I got in there, but they then started coming over to London to the SS, what was it called? The SSI, Society of Strip Illustration, scouting for talent, really, and sort of we were all kind of champing at the bit to the American dollar, and also get kind of a little bit more recognition and sort of because we didn't get our artwork back at IPC and all that sort of thing, and we were only just getting our names credited as artists and writers. In the British comics, and working in America, it's you're treated very well.
And how did it feel after 2000 AD? Because 2000 AD, it's pre-internet, so you don't know how big you are or whatever. I guess, don't you? You're in an anthology book, so you don't know whether you're one of the good ones or the ones that's not working. Did 2000 was it a positive experience? 2000, or did America feel a lot better afterwards? Or?
Well, it was all very positive. I mean, I feel I've been very fortunate. I mean, I was very fortunate to be given Judge Dredd to draw at the very beginning. And he turned out to be the hit character in the comic. And then I guess I was fortunate. Yes, I guess I then got a decent regular work at DC Comics. And then I was very fortunate to work with Alan Moore, who was, the hot writer at the time and probably continues to be. So it was all very exciting. It was all quite a buzz.
And the Dreads,
and also you get treated like a bit of a star. And when the 80s were going on, people like Frank Millar, we were treated a little bit like pop stars. They sort of. I'd never experienced being flown to a convention and being interviewed before. I mean, who would be interested in me? So that was always very exciting.
I remember in school, the 2000 AD being passed around, and the Judge Child stuff, the Dark Judges, the Cursed storyline. I mean, you were exploding at that point. Everybody was loving your stuff. Everybody's trying to copy what you're doing. I mean, I read it a little bit later, but pals were recommending stuff to me. But that was a weird thing as well, because every boy in my class read 2000 AD. Everybody, it wasn't just comic fans. It was a bit like buying New Musical Express. It was just something you got on a Friday with your pocket money,
But now there are so many forms of entertainment, aren't there? I mean, I don't read as much as I used to because there are just so many other forms of media that detract from the time I might be reading a book. So.
But do you not think excellence always finds a way, though? Because I remember in the early 90s or mid 90s, the comic market was really shrinking. And I was at this lunch, I was very new, I was only in my 20s, and I was at this lunch with some DC people, and the editors were saying, well, kids are playing video games now, the reason the sales are going down is because kids are playing games and da-da-da.
Yeah.
And I was like, the books aren't that great either, and it was the worst thing I could have said at the table. I said, I'm not reading them. I said, I get them for free as a comp box. I didn't even read them. They're not very good, and... But I think sometimes that's the horrible reality, isn't it? That the reason things dip is because it's the quality dips, and then when things are great, everybody picks it up again. If you look at comics history, every alternate decade is usually not quite as good as the decade that came before, I think.
Do you think?
The 80s and the noughties were really phenomenal compared to the other decades, I think.
By the way, that when you gave a list of names of artists that came on the scene and exploded, the last name on that list, a female, I don't know that name. What was her name again?
She has done a book that's a phenomenon. She's called Fiona Staples. And
Fiona
I'll send you a link to the book. The book was the
her up.
last really huge creator-owned hit. It came out around about 2013, I think.
Really?
And it sold insanely well. I mean, we've sold well with things, especially when we tie in with a movie that we've got out or something. But this has been
I want to ask you about that.
well, purely based on the comics alone, they've sold millions of copies with nothing to back it up in multimedia, no video game, no television show or anything. So Robert Kirkman and I have, we've sold lots of books, but we've been lucky enough to tie in with Hollywood things and everything.
Yes.
But this book that Brian Vaughan and Fiona Staples did, it was just unlike anything anybody had seen before. This little sci-fi book called Saga, and it was a phenomenon. It had a great run of about 5 or 6 years where it was all people were talking about. But I'll send you a link. I think you'd like it.
Oh, thank you. I'll have to look her up. I'm very out of touch, I'm afraid. There's, yeah. But I want to just say, by the way, that I absolutely love Kingsman.
Oh, thanks very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I just saw it, and I thought, what a great film this is. It's like James Bond, but sort of turned up to 11. Is that fair? I absolutely loved it. The scene in the church with it also has one of my favourite bits of music in it. Leonard Skinner.
It's funny. I think the original cut of that is like twice as long. And Matthew, the director, sends it up and he says, watch this. And even I really enjoy brutal action scenes, but even I was like, this is almost too much. And he came up with this, it's insane. But he came up with this really brilliant thing, which was to cut away occasionally from the action. You cut away 3 times, I think, in that scene, to cut away to someone's reaction. And it kind of gives you a breather for a second, and then you can handle the action again. But when you watch it as one continuous thing, it's almost too much to handle. And that's the amazing thing about an editor and a director, is they really think about how the audience is feeling emotionally in that sense, like where they need a little breath and, those little minute details that a lot of thought goes into. And it worked out so much better that people could handle it, but it almost felt like a horror film when you watched it in one sequence,
Well, yeah. And I had no idea that it was from a graphic novel, and it was written by you and drawn by Dave, and I still haven't seen a copy. I've never seen one. I can't imagine what his drawn version of all that stuff looks like. I've seen a lot of Dave's work, but I don't know.
When I send you this, I'll send you a copy as well. I've got tons.
Oh, wow.
Every time you do a printing, I get another 50 copies. That would help me out.
Oh, well.
Get rid of something.
Yes, please.
But it was a really nice experience, and that little thing. I mean, this current generation of comic guys are so lucky that we can own our material. So if you created something like that in the 60s, it was owned by a company, whereas Dave and I got 100% of the money. Dave and I got all the cash, which was great.
I keep saying to Dave, next time he comes to see me, he might come in his helicopter. But he says, no, not. Well done to both of you. And also Kick-Ass was you, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's me as well, yeah.
Who published a Kingsman, by the way?
Kingsman came out from... There was a little division of Marvel when I was working at Marvel. It was a kind of thank you for the people who were working there. Kind of like, do you remember in Epic in the past you would have Archie Goodwin kind of doing a little side company? There was a company called Icon, a bit like Epic, where the creators could keep the rights to their creations. So if you did Avengers or Spider-Man or something for a couple of years as a little thank you, they would let you do a couple of series that you could own. So Marvel owned no piece of it. It was entirely owned by us, which was great. And we didn't have to keep it at Paramount or wherever Marvel had a deal at the time, or Disney, I think, probably by that point. So I could shop it, and I took it to Universal and Lionsgate and everything.
And did you have anything to do with Kingsman 2 and 3, I guess?
Dave and I, we've got such a great deal. It's crazy. Because we created it, it's a bit like owning a house and you rent it, So even though I sold my company to Netflix in 2017, so I couldn't, I was exclusive to Netflix and still am. So I couldn't actually work on that because 20th Century Fox had the film rights. So I worked on the first Kingsman film, but the second one and third one I couldn't because I was exclusive elsewhere. But we had a thing in our deal where we got the same money plus 10%. every time one of those movies got made. So Dave and I got the same plus 10% every time they made a Kingsman, even though we didn't do any work on the others.
Well, you'll have to come and see me in your helicopter.
You'll see 2 helicopters landing in the
And now let me think. Red was you, wasn't it?
No, that was Warren Ellis. No,
That's Warren Ellis.
My other one that I owned was Wanted. I did Wanted with James McAvoy and Angelina Jolie, you know.
Oh, really?
So that was my first ever adaptation of one of my things, like, that I owned, you know. And, and it was really fun. It was. I mean, I never expected it, because when I was working in comics full time, it was only Batman and Spider-Man and things that get made into movies. So I never anticipated any of my stuff would actually become films, and I was really lucky. You know, everything I did got bought by the studios. Everything. So
is Kick-Ass still alive? Is that me?
Well, Kick-Ass.
There was only one. Was there one of those or two?
There was 2. There was a second one as well. You know, so Kick-Ass and Kingsman, I kept out of the deal when I sold the company to Netflix. So I still own Kick-Ass and Kingsman with Johnny Romita and Dave Gibbons. We still own it. But all the other things we've created is all owned by Netflix. So I'm in a house now at the studio, and anything I create on top of that is owned by Netflix too for a period. You know?
I see.
So it's been good. It's been a real eye opener though, because I love film, same as you. You know, I love film as much as I love comics, really, and I know as much about film as I know about comics. So it's been quite nice getting to do something a little different too. Because I mean, you've worked outside of comics so many times, haven't you? I mean, you've done album covers, you've done advertising jobs, all this kind of.
Very little, actually.
Really?
I could probably name 3 album covers I've ever done.
Right.
And I did advertising at the very beginning when I was with Garden Press, and I really didn't enjoy it, because the people in advertising agencies, they feel obliged to, they say, that's great, but can you change this?
Yeah.
It's like they're not doing their job unless they tell the artist that the car on the left has to be a bit bigger or something, you know. So I never really. The less involvement other people have in what I do, the better. So but it's mainly been comics for me. And I haven't worked in storyboard work, because you've got to work very quickly, and no one ever sees it. It's quite lucrative, I believe, but
it's not. I think part of being an artist is people seeing your work, though, isn't it? And I think there must be something so frustrating about, no matter how much it pays, for people not to see your work.
Occasionally people say to me, would you do because now I work digitally, there isn't any artwork. And occasionally people say, would you make an exclusive thing to sell to a person?
Yeah.
And no, because if I do something, I want everybody to see it. You know, I don't want it to be exclusively just hanging on somebody's wall.
I hate to say this, but I managed to get a Brian Bolland exclusive.
Did you?
What it was all my favourite artists, right? Like the guys I love, you, Kurt Swan, Joe Kubert, Alex Toth, Alan Davis, Dave Gibbons, right? I've got a wall downstairs that I want like the best guys on, right? That I just, it's like the Hall of Fame for comic book artists, right?
So you got one of mine?
I got one of yours, and I was so dead. I wanted to finish the wall. I was waiting for the right page, and your stuff's quite hard to get, especially since you've gone digital. You know, it's quite hard to find your stuff.
Yes.
And but I saw this Batman sketch you'd obviously done for a guy at a convention or something. But it's you, right? So there's a certain level of detail. It looks like something you could publish, even though it's a sketch. And this guy charged me like $3,000 for it or something like that, you know, like. But I bought it, and I've got it framed, and it's above my piano downstairs in the basement, you know. So my comic wall, you know.
You'll have to send me a photo.
I'll send you a picture. It's a great, it's a great shot actually. It's a really good Batman, you know. But
I've still got a few pages of my artwork, which I've got about 3 or 4 pages of the Innocent Guy story, because it's some of my favourite stuff.
Just in your own personal collection,
I don't really intend to part with that unless some very rich person with a helicopter wants to throw a lot of money my way. I don't know. No, I loved Kingsman. I really did. Yeah, I mean, I've always been I'm quite pretentious, really, when it comes to movies, because I like Andrei Tarkovsky, and is he called Roy Andersson? Is a real favourite of mine. The Swede. Not Guy, not Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
No, he's a Swede. I think his first name is Roy. Look him up. He made a film called a pigeon sits on a branch contemplating existence. And they're very, very strange. It is. You must have to check him out.
I'm going to check it out, actually. You know.
Yeah, write that down. There's another one. I think it's called Stories from the Third Floor. Yeah. Another one is called We the Living. And I think it was a trilogy. I wish I'd been prepared. I could have held it up to the camera. But everything is shot. Everything is beige. Everyone is very depressed all the time. There are moments of real cruelty in them. And the camera never moves. He fixes the camera at a certain angle, and there are things happening in the fringes of the frame that you think, oh, there's a person on the extreme left suddenly starts doing something or saying something, and in the background you'll see a procession or something going by on the street outside. It's just very, very strange. It's almost like a depressed Monty Python.
But somebody told me your music taste is very esoteric, though, as well, isn't it? You've got you're not into the Bee Gees or anything like that. You know, it'll be something.
No, I mean, I like. My taste ranges from the kind of fringes of the extremities of the avant-garde.
Yeah.
There's a fellow called Alvin Lucier who did a thing called Music on a Long Thin Wire, which we can sit and listen to. I love it. There's a group called Fuck Buttons. Have you heard of Fuck Buttons? I think I mentioned that. I mentioned them in a. I went into the rough trade on Brick Lane, and there was this fantastic throbbing electronic music going on in the background. And I said, "What is that?" And they said, "Oh, that's Fuck Buttons." And so I bought it. Have you heard them? You must look them up. I mean, I can send you a link.
I'm going to write that down as well. My wife's going to find this note. I'm writing that down.
She'll probably think you want her to mend your shirt or something.
I think
there's another group called Swan.
Years ago that he went to your flat, and you used to have a flat near where the comic conventions was. Was it Ormond Street Mansions? Were you in that sort of?
Yes, I was at Southampton Road, just down from Russell Square.
And he said to me that he sat with you and you put on some music, and he's into some pretty out there stuff.
Who are you talking about?
Grant Morrison told me this like 25, 30 years ago or something, that he sat with you one time and you played the stuff, and even he hadn't heard of these guys. It was so obscure, you know.
Oh, the other group I want to mention, and I did mention it in the email to you, was Swans. Swans is a group led by a fellow called Michael Gerard, I think his name is. And somebody described the music as a brick to the face, and then another, and then another. And I went to see them live in about 1990.
What was the audience like? What was the crowd like?
They were goths. I saw it at the Mean Fiddler in Harlesden in North London, and they were a gothy bunch because the music is loud and like a brick to the face, basically. And they were all in their gothy stuff, but then the music started, and it was just so loud that you could feel it. You could feel the impact of it on your stomach as it's quite sort of. Well, I think that description is pretty as close to it. So I like that kind of thing. But then, I'm getting animated now, aren't I? I discovered Robert Crumb's music. Robert Crumb had a band called the Cheap Suit Serenaders.
Was this the
band? Was full of these
play? Was it that?
Yes, it's sort of banjo and musical saw, and sort of. Not sure quite what other is, but it was all these wonderful old tunes from way back, And suddenly I discovered I had a great taste for ancient string band music from the 20s.
Yeah,
people like Gid Tanner and his Skillet Lickers and Al Hopkins and his Buckle Busters, people of that sort, and it's all music from the very beginning of the period when they were recording popular music, really.
It's funny when you get into something from before your period, when you should be into something like...
Yes.
We form our taste at a particular age, don't we? And then sometimes when you're a bit older, you find stuff from before you were born that you're obsessed with.
Yes, Well, I really got into Western Swing, which was sort of from the 40s, I think. Yeah. Me and Howard Chaykin have a shared taste in Western Swing and stuff of that sort.
Chaykin's
like Spade Cooley.
He's got the most amazing CD collection, Chaikin. Chaikin's got like basically everything that ever existed. You know,
Has he?
Yeah, he seems to be an expert on like 40s and 50s jazz in particular. You know, like
I think he's got a period. There's a period. I don't think he'd get into fuck buttons actually, or swans, or the Incredible String Band, or anything like that. But he knows his 40s sort of Western swing and rockabilly probably.
I really get into in a big way, like guys like Ron Grainer and you know, like Burt Bacharach and things like that, stuff that I never thought in a million years I'd be interested in, you know.
Well, I mean, my interest in Ron Grainer is the BBC Radiophonic Workshop with Delia Derbyshire. Delia Derbyshire created the Doctor Who theme, the original, didn't she? But he wrote it, I think. But she somehow managed to, I think the term was realise it using a lampshade or something, I know.
And all those, that period of guys like Johnny Pearson and all that, there was a whole bunch of those guys who were all around at the same time and all fantastic, you know.
I don't know that name, Johnny Pearson.
He did. I mean, this is so uncool, but he did the All Creatures Great and Small tune, which I absolutely love. It's fantastic. But he'll do the maddest things you can imagine as well, but then something super mainstream like that too, you know. So
okay, yeah.
But I became obsessed with soundtracks about 10 years ago, and that's the bulk of my collection now. You know?
Only the other day, I was there was an actress in. I used to watch Danger Man in 1963, and an actress who I rather fancied back in those days. I noticed she died recently, so I was watching Danger Man, and I really love Edwin Astley's theme tune to the Danger Man TV show.
He's one of the greatest of all time, though. He's phenomenal. Yeah.
Didn't he do The Saint as well? Was it? Yeah.
Which is amazing. Yeah. No, he's great. I just play their stuff when I'm working. That's the stuff I can put on in the background because there's no lyrics. It's easy to.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose you're right. I could listen to any kind of music because I'm just drawing. Whereas you're having to think.
Well, dialogue clashing with lyrics is like a nightmare. You know? So whereas if you've got Astley or somebody on in the background, it's great. Yeah. Weirdly, a friend of mine told me it was weirdly the guy who did who gave me the Power Man comics. You know your Power Man comics. He's a guy who runs a radio station, right? And he's in his mid-70s or something like that now, right? So he used to work at BBC Scotland, and he interviewed Burt Bacharach for Radio Scotland. He told me the best music journalist story I've ever heard, right? And what it was he had to talk to Bacharach about his career, and he had to fly from Glasgow to London, London to New York to Los Angeles, then hire a car and go to Burt Bacharach's house. And he said whenever he got there, Burt Bacharach answered the door just wearing a tiny pair of Speedos, right? And he's like an old man at this point, right? And he opened the door and he just said, yeah. And there was no security, nothing, you know. And he said, I'm from the BBC. And he said, all right. And he says, 2 questions, then fuck off. Like, that's right. and then he just walked away and he saw this old man in Speedos just walking into the distance, right? And he wandered in behind him. And he said he looked and he saw drugs on a table. And he saw a pile of money on a kitchen table across from it, like loads of $100 bills. And he just kept walking and followed him. And then he said he switched on his tape recorder and he said Burt Bacharach was amazing. He gave the 2 most amazing answers you could imagine. He was just so lucid and was brilliant and everything. And as soon as he switched the tape recorder off, he said, right, that's your 2 questions, now fuck off. And he got in his car, went to LA, went to New York, went to London, back up to Glasgow, and he had the 2 questions on tape, you know. So,
and he's got that on tape.
He's got it on tape. It is. The guys you least expect, you know. But what about film then? I mean, you're obviously, you'll watch commercial stuff too and everything, but you must have grown up loving Ray Harryhausen movies and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I did. I loved, the one with Talos, what was that?
Jason and the Argonauts is one of the great.
Jason and the Argonauts, I remember as a kid sort of kind of acting out the statue coming to life scene, you know, for people who haven't seen the film. Oh yeah, I loved all that. And I never met Harryhausen, but he was at a San Diego convention once, being, loads of fans were there, so I didn't get near him. But I liked all that stuff. But, you know, I went to art school, so... I remember watching Yoko Ono No. 4, which was her film of Bottoms. Mm-hmm. just close-ups of naked bottoms walking on a treadmill. Have you ever seen that film?
Yes.
And the Warhol films, which just went on forever. So, I got quite sort of pretentious with my taste in film. Only 2 days ago, I went to see the latest Yorgos Lanthimos film, Kinds of Kindness. Do you know what I'm talking about? Kinds of
I haven't
Kindness.
seen it, but I know it. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's long and aggravating, and I wasn't sure I was enjoying it, but by the end of it, I was glad I'd seen it, because I loved his previous film, Poor Things.
So where was that screening? Where was it showing? Was it in a regular cinema?
It was at our local cinema here is called View.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a big cinema chain. Yeah.
What's quite nice about these things, though, is they can put something unusual on screen 14, because Inside Out 2 is paying the bells, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think this Lanthimos fellow, because it's got Emma Stone and Willem Dafoe, so A-list people in it.
Yeah, it'll probably make its money
people
back.
Think it's they think it's a sort of a mainstream film, but it certainly isn't.
But it's funny because although you've got high-end tastes, at the same time when you were at art school, somebody, I think it was Richard Burton, told me you wrote a dissertation on Neil Adams, which I love as well. So you've got that love of mainstream pop culture as well. So how did that go down? Because that must have been late 60s, early 70s, early 70s.
I went to art school in 1969, and I finished in 1974.
And that's, I'd imagine comics would be relatively despised by teachers at that period.
Yes. Yes, there was no interest on the part of any of the tutors in comics at all.
Yeah.
And when I said my dissertation was going to be about comics, they didn't know anything about comics, and I decided it would be all about Neil Adams, who suddenly was the big thing.
Yeah.
And it was quite a long one. And when I turned it in, they'd never heard of this guy.
Yeah.
They weren't sure whether I'd made him up.
That would be a great art school project to make somebody else.
Yes, you could do that, couldn't you? You could write a dissertation on an imaginary artist that you invent.
But that's what I love about you, Brian, because I feel as if whatever direction it's going, you'll think, wouldn't this be a more interesting take? So when everybody else is doing Modigliani or something, you're like, I'll maybe do Neil Adams,
Yeah.
I think that's your underground sensibilities, though, isn't it, as well? You'll go against the grain, I think.
Well, not deliberate. I suppose I'm a little bit contrary.
But that's a good thing in an artist, though, isn't it? You don't want to be doing what everyone else is doing.
Yes. What was I going to say? But I must say I've seen enough superhero movies.
Yes. I think the whole world's with you there, yeah.
I don't need to. I mean, I enjoyed the one with Ryan Reynolds.
Deadpool's great, yeah.
Deadpool, that's great fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I don't. I'm not terribly interested in Star Wars or Star Trek or any of those.
I think my love of these things has waned in the sense that I noticed this thing a few weeks ago. Everybody was getting really upset about, all these new terrible Star Wars TV shows that everybody hates,
I've heard that there are some, yes.
Yeah, they're not great. But but I had this real realisation that maybe it's a good thing that they're not great. And what it was I was thinking, we're as far away from Star Wars now, time-wise, as Star Wars was from Tarzan the Ape Man starring Johnny Weissmuller in 1950, right? So it's a long time ago. And the idea that we as middle-aged men or whatever, should still be expecting high-quality stuff from our childhoods, is like my dad saying to me in 1977, don't go and see Star Wars because there's talk that Maureen O'Sullivan is coming back as Jane, and why don't you buy these Tarzan toys? And I realised that maybe we have to destroy these things that we love so new pop culture can come in. Maybe it's important. That we would lament if the last Star Wars movie had been amazing. We would lament it going, whereas we're celebrating Doctor Who and Star Wars and these things going now because they've kind of they've overstayed their welcome culturally, I think, haven't they?
Well, I mean, Doctor Who, for instance, is a sort of an institution, isn't it? Do you watch Doctor Who?
I haven't watched it in years, though, but I feel as if I'm quite mainstream, though, that whenever everybody's into it, I was into it, and then when it got more niche, I lost interest,
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to see anything that's more niche, really. I mean, whatever's on TV, you just have to swallow what's... Well, I suppose nowadays you can go anywhere and find anything, really, can't you? But, yeah.
But do you think, though, that maybe it's a good thing superheroes going because it opens the path for something else now? You know, we've had 25 years of superhero movies. You know?
Well, I'm glad that there are people... I love saying his name, Apichatpong Wirasithakul. I don't know whether I got the name right. Apichatpong Wirasithakul makes films. He's a Thai film director.
Yeah.
It makes the slowest films. You think if something doesn't happen in the next few minutes, I'm walking out of here. Oh, is that right? Yeah. Anyway. So there are. I mean, the people that interest me are sort of completely out of the mainstream. You know, they are their own thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether the superhero movie will evolve into anything better. I don't really know.
But do you not think that there tends to be sort of 3 decades of cultural dominance, I think, in the mainstream? Because I've always loved the mainstream. I've always been an unashamed mainstream guy, you know. But, you know, you've got that period of gangster movies that lasted a long time. Then you had the westerns for 30 years. Then you had the cop movies for 30 years. 1970 to 2000, it was the cop movies. From Dirty Harry up to Bad Boys 2 kind of thing, you know. And and then superheroes, it's their time. And there's a little bit of a crossover. The westerns and the cop movies crossed over with Clint Eastwood for a little while, you know.
Yeah,
and similarly, I think we're in the end of the superhero thing, but the beginning of the next thing, which I think is quite exciting, isn't it?
Oh, okay. So do you think the superhero movies will... Ooh, I've got a sign on there that says low device storage.
Ooh.
And I've got to go okay. So it's all over your face. What was the last thing we were talking about?
Well, just saying, do you think the superhero movies, I think you were going to say, they're about to go away?
Will burn themselves out. Do you think I think they're just going to carry on, aren't they? Because the screen has gone grey, by the way. Not only is there a thing in the middle of the screen.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, well, if it cuts out, I won't take it personally. It just means you're all right. Gun. You just... I think these things, you know, the market corrects itself, doesn't it? You know, so when they did 2 a year or 3 a year, everybody was excited. But when you do 2 a month, there's all these TV shows, people just get a bit fed up and look for something else, you know. So I think we're in a kind of course correction just now, because they used to always hire the really amazing directors for this stuff, and they started hiring a lot of sort of people who weren't experienced enough to make genre material, I think, really work. And it's a hard thing to do, you know. It takes... Christopher Nolan did Batman and he did it beautifully, and Joel Schumacher did the exact same character in the exact same world, and it was a mess, you know. So if you're not great at your job, these things can be quite bad, you know. Yeah,
that's true. That is true. Mm.
So, I mean, we should probably wrap up soon. You know, I'm trying to think of anything we haven't covered. You know, a thing that we didn't really talk about is Camelot 3000s, because I've always wondered, do you own that? Do you and Mike W. Barr own Camelot 3000 because it's the original? Is that owned by DC? Yeah.
It's all owned by DC, yes. I don't own any of it.
It'd be such an awesome movie, I think, or a TV series, I think. It's such a great concept, isn't it? The Arthurian legend in a sci-fi environment.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I think it's great. Great characters and everything, great bad guys and everything, and it was so visually amazing. Listen, tell me, I've always wanted to ask you this, and now I've got you. Is it true Ross Andrew laid out the cover for you in the first issue? Was that...
Yes, after I did my first Green Lantern cover, when I was doing the subsequent covers on Green Lantern were laid out by Ross Andrew, and that carried on. And with the first 2 Camelot covers, they sent me. I was rather surprised because, you know, having been a professional artist on covers for 5 years or so, I found it rather weird that they didn't trust me enough to come up with my own cover. But after 2 by Ross Andrew, whose work I really like.
Oh, he's great. He's very dynamic.
Andrew and Esposito. I love Metal Men.
Yeah, they're great.
So I was a little bit insulted that I was sent a layout by him.
And was that standard practice back then, if it was somebody who...
I don't know. I would imagine so. I would imagine they wouldn't have just singled me out as a person who had to be guided. I guess it must have been, yes. I guess so. But after, you know, I must have grumbled about it. And I mean, in fact, what happened was, for the first cover, he sent me the rough sketch.
Yeah.
And I thought, fuck this, I can come up with it. So I actually drew something completely different for the first cover. And they said, no, this isn't any good. So I ended up actually doing the first cover over Ross's layout, but the cover that I tried to the cover to number one was used as a pin-up page somewhere later on.
Right.
So that was the...
It looked amazing. I mean, that's something that deserves, I don't know if it's ever been done, but a big oversized hardcover of that, I think would be amazing.
Well, actually, the Spanish and French editions are rather nice because they're slightly bigger in size. Right. And if you just want to look at the art, I've got them on the shelf back here somewhere. But, I should have prepared that if I'd known you were going to... But I always thought that The Cursed Earth would make a great film, you know.
Yeah.
There have been 2 goes at making a Judge Dredd film, and neither. I mean, the first one they didn't get it right when he took his helmet off.
Yeah. And
the second one didn't really have Mega City in it.
Yes. It was
but if they could make a Dredd film that had just the craziness of Mega City and The Cursed Earth and all that sort of... There was a TV show called... Oh, what was it called? It was the one that had Walton Goggins in it.
Oh, Fallout?
Fallout, that's the one. And it was a bit like looking at a Cursed Earth movie. There was a guy who was bald, but he had an ear growing out of his head just there. And I thought, if they could do that in a TV series, they could make a film of that stuff.
I remember I had a drink one time with the guy who produced the Carol Urban Dredd movie, and he told me what their plan was. And the plan was to do the Cursed Earth, but the budget had to be so tight in that first one, because Dredd's, it's not like Batman, it's internationally, it's relatively unknown compared to something like Batman, so it doesn't have that built-in audience. So their idea was they were going to prove with the first movie that there was that audience, and the second movie I think was going to be The Cursed Earth, and then the third one was going to be Dark Judges.
Oh, really?
Ones they really wanted to make. So Alex Garland, who wrote it, was going to do all 3. I might have that the wrong way around, but the next 2 movies were going to be Cursed Earth and Dark Judges. You know? And they were quite wise because they thought also Dark Judges might be too much for people to get when they're just introducing them to the character of Dredd before you see the dark version of that, you know. But the big thing was budget, so that's why it was all set like the Raid, you know, in one building. And it was a nice movie as well. But I have a feeling the director left halfway through, and I think I heard. I think Alex Garland ended up directing a lot of it. I think it was quite a troubled production. But I thought it was very good. I really enjoyed it.
I think Carl Urban has said that he would play the part.
Yeah.
If asked, hasn't he?
I think to do it justice, you've got to spend over 100 million probably in a Dredd movie. Though,
I think so.
And then that means it's...
Now, here's a question I should have asked you at the very beginning. How do you pronounce your last name?
Well, in Scotland, we say Millar because, you know, I've got relatives who spell it ER, you know.
Well, to me, Millar has always been ER. Well, I've never seen it spelled your way. But I've been calling you Mark Millar.
Well, all the Americans call me that, and I love how pretentious it sounds. It sounds like Ray Milland. It's like Ray Milland. So I never correct them. I let them do it. But you know, there's a really sad reason why there's Millar and Millar, and it's because basically until about 3 or 4 generations ago, nobody could read and write in these families, you know? So they just did it their own way. You know? So
just wrote down.
So it's just
I thought possibly you were a bit like David Williams, who is really David Williams, but he changed the vowel in his name because there is another David Williams.
Do you know, that's a good... Although it's weird, I was at a sports physio today. I knackered my shoulder playing tennis a little while ago, and there was somebody else called Mark Millar in for an appointment this afternoon as well. And they thought I'd double booked. I mean, I've never met another guy with my name before. It's weird. Or I may be double booked. Maybe the receptionist is there. That does sound the more likely.
Anyway, do we need to wind this up, or
we should probably
be in charge of that?
Probably wind it up. But listen, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. I'm trying to think, was there any other thing I was going to add? Oh yeah, one last thing. Is it true you were born in a farming family? Because you know I'm very interested in farming. Is it true your dad was a farmer?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
So you grew up on a farm?
No, we. The house on the farm didn't have electricity, and my mother wasn't prepared to live in it. So we lived in a bungalow in the next village along, in Lincolnshire.
Ah, right.
Near Boston.
But did you help out on the farm?
Yeah, I did had to do farm work, and I mean, my summer work was pulling beans and tidying up tulip bulbs and sort of picking marrows and things like that, which is horrible work. So I didn't take to. I think secretly my father would have quite liked me to have carried on in the profession, but I was not interested.
Well, it's funny. My father-in-law's a farmer, so my wife grew up on a farm, and she learned how to drive when she was 10. You know, she can fix anything. It's crazy. Like,
I think if my father had ever let me as a child drive a tractor, I might have taken to farming. But I have to plug my book, by the way. I've got a book called "It's About Time,"
oh my God.
which is a pictorial autobiography of me.
What?
I should have.
I didn't know about this. Is it out? Is it out?
I did not know it. I'm going to have to wave it at the camera.
Oh, let me see it. I need to buy this. I don't have it.
I'm going to have to plug this because there it is. Not seen that?
Oh no! When did this come out?
Probably about a year ago now, and it's a biography done entirely in pictures.
Oh my God! And it looks.
But when I say pictures, they're not drawings. They're sort of scans and sort of photographs of sort of the period that I was in at the time. This is about the albums and music that I was encountering at the time. But it's about 40 quid, I think. So it's not a cheap thing, but it's full of pictures.
I've got to pick this up. That's amazing.
There's me and Dave on the back there. So there you go. I've plugged it. It's About Time.
Listen, you've got one more sale because I'm literally going to order that tonight. Fantastic! Oh, amazing. Well, you know, I love a big thick art book. I love a thick art book. Yeah,
I mean, I was quite pleased with this. It's a good solid thing, but you know, people may be disappointed if they're expecting my drawings. I think there are about 2 drawings, maybe 3 drawings by me in here that are unique to the book. But anyway, there you go.
I need to get that. I've actually got Confabulation over there, Dave's book that came out this year. You know,
well, in fact, funnily enough, Dave's book and my book came out very much at the same time. But Dave stuck strictly to the profession and his encounters with people in the profession of comics. Mine hardly talks about comics at all. It just mentions at one point that I started working for 2000 AD in 1977, but then goes on to talk about my trip to Hollywood and to see Star Wars.
One last question I've remembered as well is when you lived in Southampton Row, I think you were a neighbour of Ricky Gervais without realising it.
I did not know that.
What years were you in Southampton Row?
79 to 93.
Because in the 90s, Ricky Gervais lived in, I think it was Ormond Mansions or something it was called. I can't remember, the one that's halfway up the street, across the road.
Yeah, that's where I lived. I lived at 110A.
So I think he was in one of those flats when you were there in the 90s.
Oh, really? But
he was the manager of Swed at the time. You know the band Swed?
Say that again, please.
You know the English music group Swed?
Sweat.
Sorry, Suede. Suede is how.
Oh, Suede. Sorry.
Scottish people say Swed. So.
Really, I'm so sorry.
But he was their manager, like Suede's manager at the time.
Oh, was he? Oh,
I think he was in your building, weirdly, but you never knew him, no.
I think there was another artist in the building called, was it Jeremy Banks with an X?
Right.
I think he was there, but no, I never met Ricky Gervais, or I may have done, but I wouldn't have known who he was at the time.
Because it was a cool part of town, wasn't it? Like, that's where all the comic conventions used to be, so it was quite buzzing whenever you were down there, you know?
Yeah, I had loads of people come to visit me. I mean, Frank Millar and loads of people came over to visit.
That little scene was lovely, wasn't it? You know, that 80s comic scene was great.
The UCAC and all that sort of stuff, the comic marts and all that sort of stuff was great, yeah.
And they had it just round the corner from your flat, didn't they? They had it in that university building? Yeah.
Yes, I think very close to the flat, the very first ones, yeah. But others were at Westminster and Camden and places of that sort, yeah. Did you used to go to those?
I came down when I was 18. I remember I had no money at all, and I got, you know those overnight buses from Scotland, it's just alcoholics on the bus, you pay 10 quid.
Oh, really?
And it's just people fighting and everything on the bus, you know. I did that when I was 18, and I showed up with an art portfolio, and I went to the SSI, which was the night before the convention, you know.
Yes.
And I remember standing behind an artist, and I realised that my portfolio was essentially like a maths jotter, with drawings of Spider-Man in it and everything, because I wanted to be an artist. And then there was a guy in front of me, and he was a proper artist. He had a big leather-bound portfolio and beautifully inked A3 pages and everything. And I was like, I can't do this. And I was too embarrassed to show my stuff. I felt like a kid. And then I came back next year and tried to be a writer. Yeah.
Was I there?
You were, but I mean, you were in that sort of like, you were in the Olympus kind of level.
Right.
It was you and David Lloyd was walking around and all that. It was all the adults. You guys were the adults, So.
Yeah. Well, we were like that. When we first went to the conventions, it was great to meet Frank Bellamy and people of that sort.
Well, by the end of the weekend, actually, I'd got to know some people. But your first convention when you're a kid, you don't know anyone, obviously. You're a new guy in the scene. That first day is quite tough, isn't it? You're walking around and it's established groups of friends, and you're trying to break in without looking like a psycho and everything,
Yeah, I suppose that's the way of it, isn't it?
But by the Sunday, you're friends with a dozen guys, aren't you? I mean, it's always okay,
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
But what I do every time I go to a show and speak now is I always say, introduce yourself to the person on your left and your right in the audience so that everybody leaves knowing somebody,
Okay.
Because there's nothing worse than just sitting not knowing anyone at a talk, isn't there?
My problem at conventions is that I can't remember who anybody is. People come up and greet me, and I think, who the hell is it? Who is this? And it was Pete Doherty and Mike Perkins. I had to ask them their names, and they, I'm Mike Perkins, and I sort of worked with. Now there's some strange things going on the screen. The picture has suddenly got smaller, and there's a blue line running along the top, which is almost at the end.
Oh well,
so I'm exciting things are going on.
I'm about to go and vote now. Actually,
oh yes.
Although this is Monday, as far as anyone else is concerned, it's going up next week. Today is general election day in the UK. So
and it's July the 4th, isn't it?
Do you bother voting? Do you do anything? Do you?
I have voted. My wife and I went and voted just before I came on here, actually.
I find general elections is like football for me, I'm excited to go and vote, and then I love to be at home and watching the results. I'll stay up all night. I'm having a little party tonight, get some friends and everything.
Yeah, a friend of mine's going to stay up to watch the whole thing tonight. I won't. I'm, to be quite honest, I'm more anxious about the election in America.
It's a funny year. I mean, isn't that something crazy? Like 60% of the planet is voting this year or something?
Yeah, but I mean, whatever the outcome of the election, the American election, is going to be, well, strange. And, it's going to... I mean, if Trump gets in, the world is going to change.
Well, I think that America's in its final 10 years, unfortunately, I think, really, anyway, isn't it? You know that idea that superpowers get 100 years, roughly?
Yes.
You had the British Empire, the Portuguese Empire, the French Empire.
The American experiment.
And this is just the end of the American period. And usually the country that owns the debt is the next superpower, which in America's case is China, So I think we're just in the final 10 years of American supremacy, really. It always ends with a big war, doesn't it?
So right at the end of this podcast, we're getting political, are we?
Well, do you know, to me, it's just history. It's just history. I'm not taking China's side just for all the Americans.
No, I know.
It's just things have their time. And I think we'll miss America when it's gone, though. I mean, America has been the greatest 100 years, I mean, there's no other time you'd rather have been alive in history than the American century. It's been a good one,
It's been very good, yeah.
On that note, I mean, that's a pretty big...
On that note... The end of America. We shouldn't be controversial. We love you, America. I owe America a lot, so I wish America well. Anyway, Mark, it's been really great fun.
Great talking to you, and hopefully we'll get that little dinner going, because you're not that far away from me now as well.
No, we can't say where, can we? Because you will have people turning up at our house. But and you can come over in your helicopter and
you'll come down
and see me sometime.
Steal some of your artwork. Brilliant. Listen, great seeing you all next Sunday.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks then. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.